Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Science Fiction Podcast. I'm Shay Northrup.
And I'm Pauline.
And we're going to talk about the new Suicide Squad movie, the future from the 80's, and the hit series Mass Effect video games. Now, just to start off, I just went and saw Suicide Squad this weekend, and I actually really enjoyed it despite popular belief. I don't know. What do you know about the franchise?
So, I actually have not seen the movie yet. I have seen the trailer, and I'm actually kind of pretty disappointed because my brothers went to see the movie without me. They did invite me, so I'll give them that. But they wanted to go like really late at night, and it was one of those spur-of-the-moment things where they were like, kind of, we're going right now, so if you get in the car, you can come with us. If you don't, bye, type of thing.
But, Pauline, that's like the best time to go and see
I know.
movies.
And I'm usually pretty down for like spur-of-the-moment things. And
right.
Especially because this movie is so like popular and a lot of people have been talking about it. I did want to see it just because of that. It wasn't
right.
It wasn't one of those things where it was like, I've been wanting to see it or looking forward to it, but I would have went if I went with my brothers. And so I kind of missed out on that opportunity. But I think because, okay, when I saw like the trailer for the movie, I still wasn't too excited. I like Will Smith. So I was like, oh, like, you know, I like Will Smith. Like, I might want to see this movie. But then now that the movie has come out and so many people, like you said, have not really liked it.
Right.
After all the anticipation and all like the build up to it coming out, now I do want to see it because I'm trying to figure out why is everybody so upset when it seemed like everyone was so excited for this movie to come out. What is everybody so disappointed about?
Well, to start things off, I just wanted to say that the best two times to go and see movies are either late at night because nobody's there.
True. Very true.
Or early in the morning, because usually if you go in the morning, I don't know about your local theaters, but the Cinemark that I go to is like $5 cheaper if you go in the morning. Mm-hmm. So if I go in at like 11 or 10, first off, there's not going to be a whole lot of people there. Yeah. Second, especially if it's a scary movie or a rated R movie, it's usually old people and children that go to the movies that early.
Yeah.
So you can kind of get into a movie that you would probably prefer, or at least I would probably prefer, and there'll be less people in the theater to annoy me. Now, the thing with the Suicide Squad, I wanted to talk a little bit about my first impressions as well, because you mentioned that you were actually excited by the trailer. When I first saw the trailer, my first thought was, oh no. What is this?
Right.
Oh no. I'm watching the trailer. I'm like, who are these people? Mm-hmm. What is this? Why? And you know, like it's no secret that I'm not a huge fan of the Marvel franchise. Like I understand it and I appreciate it for what it is, but I really feel like they've been selling us the same movie 13 times over and over and over again. Even Deadpool was a bit of a letdown for me because I'm not going to get into that. But I was like, oh no, here's another edgy, and I use the word edgy with quotations around it, superhero movie. Like I was kind of of the thought process that this was going to be like the old Daredevil movie. I don't know if you saw that, the old early 2000s Daredevil movie. It was edgy. Yeah. You know, right down to the ending credits having that, you know, rock and roll song where the guy has that twangy voice. It sounds like he's gargling marbles. Like, I thought that this was going to be like that. I thought that this was going to be one of those. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not a huge fan of the character Harley Quinn, mostly because everybody has to dress up for her as Halloween, and everyone's like, she's a strong female character. And I'm like, no, she's not. She's the Joker's slave. Like,
oh, yeah.
She is the embodiment of a weak female character, although she does get better in the future. And in this movie, she definitely shows some very strong traits. I love how she uses her sexuality to get what she wants and to take advantage of men and that sort of thing. She's just very abused by the Joker. Now, one of the things that I'd like to bring up is if you look at the scores, IMDb gives it a 6.9 out of 10, which is actually pretty decent. Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 27% out of 100. And Metacritic, which, I mean, don't ever trust Metacritic. Metacritic is baloney. It has 40%. So this movie was directed by David Ayer. It stars Will Smith and has Margaret Robbie playing Harley Quinn. And the basic premise behind Suicide Squad is there's a group of supervillains that are all brought together to take on the missions that superheroes can't, that, you know, require a little bit more black tie, like, you know, sort of thing. And so if they're caught, the government completely denies their existence, and which is the same with like black tie operations in the military, and they get time shaved off their life. So some of these guys have like 3-time life sentences. Some of them have life sentences, and so they're getting like 10 years shaved off for doing this. Now, one of the things that I have to really say that I loved about this movie, I could talk about how Harley Quinn and Deadshot were great, and Killer Croc was hilarious, by the way. I loved Killer Croc in this movie. But one of the things that, like, I have to say I loved the most about this movie was the fact that the villain, like the evil villain that they have to stop, was actually kind of like, for a minute I was like, how are these guys going to be able to take this thing on? Like, in most Marvel movies, and most superhero movies in general, it's, you see the bad guy and you're really not that impressed. He doesn't really do anything. He never wins. Like, there's really you know that it's going to end on a happy note, especially with Marvel, because they're so like jokey and like, ooh, so quirky. This movie has a lot of dread to it. There's a lot of like, there's a lot at stake, and you're really not sure that these ragtag group of misfits are going to be able to get through it. And though there were a few lulls in the movie, I love the way that they set it up. I love the way they set up the characters. I even liked Flag, the only real good guy in the Suicide Squad. And no, I really enjoyed the movie. I wish that more superhero movies were like this. I wish that they were a little bit more dark and acquired more of like the modern culture. One of the things that I think is kind of terrible about the Marvel series is it's very whitewashed. This movie is definitely not whitewashed. It is pretty multicultural. And just a real treat. I even liked Jared Leto's Joker, which was another thing I was kind of like worried about, because I watched the trailer and I'm like, this seems edgy. But I watched the movie and he's kind of like a gangster, and that was what the Joker was traditionally, like a gangster with this kind of comedic edge to him. And his obsession with Harley Quinn is amazing. Like, he will stop at nothing to get his woman back, and I'm not sure if it's necessarily out of love or just because like she's like a symbol to him, like she's like a thing that he needs to have with him. Like, it's very interesting. I even loved his gang. Like, there's a part where his gang's running around and shooting up stuff and doing what they're supposed to do, and like one of them is in a panda suit, one of them has like a cheese head mask, and I mean it's very characterized and a lot, you know, more a lot different than, you know, the other Jokers we've seen in the past. I'm not saying he's the best, but I really enjoyed it. So if you want to give it a chance, I would say go check out Suicide Squad. I enjoyed it. I honestly like what DC's doing right now. I know that is a very unpopular opinion. You can crucify me later.
Yeah, I was going to say, because a lot of people did not like Joker.
Yeah, no, and I think they're wrong.
Because, and so that's kind of one big reason why I do want to see this movie, is I want to see what everybody's so upset about.
You know, like he like I said, he's a gangster in this. Like, I mean, he's got the jewels and he's got the tats, and, you know, he's crazy. Yeah. And like, if you think about it, in the old comic books, the Joker was a gangster, like a mobster, I should say. But this is definitely the modern gangster, and I really appreciated this. Like, I really appreciated like what he is. He's it's unlike any Joker we've seen. He's a little bit like it reminds me a bit of the Killing Jokes Joker in a lot of ways. If you've ever read the comic book or watched the newest animated movie. he reminds me of that Joker, and that's something that I kind of enjoy. Mm-hmm. So I really like the direction that DC is taking right now. I really like this dark universe where death and decay and villains actually hold a lot of weight, as opposed to Marvel's, where the villains are really just weaklings, and we watch these heroes just beat them to smithereens. Like, there's a lot of weight that's going on here. There's a lot of storytelling, and I know a lot of people aren't really looking forward to the Wonder Woman movie because they don't want it to be like Batman versus Superman. They don't want it to be like Suicide Squad. But DC, keep doing what you're doing. I'm at least enjoying it. I have a couple friends that are at least enjoying it, and it looks like we're coming up on a break right now. But when we get back, we're going to talk about the future from the 80s. Stick around.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So if you ever want to watch a movie that just has the most interesting take on the future ever, watch a low budget or even a Hollywood budget 80s movie about the future or science fiction, because you can get some really interesting things. I don't know. I just really find that era of movies does a really interesting job of portraying things. Like, just the 80s in general has its own style and own vibe that nothing has ever been able, like no other decade has been able to capture the same kind of magic as per se the 80s have. And I don't know, Paulina, what do you have to say about that?
I think that I like because now we're at that like future point that the 80s was looking at.
Right.
And we're like moving into that time that they thought was going to be like the future and how we should be now. And I think it's kind of funny because some things have come to pass and some things we are seeing like being developed, but then a lot of other things are just really comical because
right.
That's really what they thought we were going to be like.
Right. Well, and that's just for any science fiction movie, like you can go back to the 50s and the 60s and even the 70s. Like, just watch any science fiction movie from before and see like where we've come as opposed to what they thought we were going to be. Like, I mean, like people thought like, by now we'd be flying in flying cars, but we're nowhere near that. But so one of the things that's really interesting, I'm glad you brought that up, is have you ever seen, I know this is kind of a dumb question, have you ever seen RoboCop or Starship Troopers?
It's Starship Troopers, yeah.
So Paul, I'm gonna butcher his last name, Verhoeven. I cannot pronounce his last name to save my life. But the same guy who did RoboCop and Starship Troopers, in both of his movies, which are by the way really satirical about the 80s themselves and use a lot of like puns and they're really like tongue-in-cheek about the future and really tongue-in-cheek about society of the time. Well, one of the things that you'll notice in both RoboCop and Starship Troopers is that the bathrooms are unisex. Both movies have these shower scenes where in RoboCop it's the police are all showering together and it's women and men showering in the same shower without sexualizing each other and everything. I think there were a couple people doing it in RoboCop in that shower, but it's the same thing in Starship Troopers. The men in shower with the women, and so they like in Paul's mind, it seems, in the ideal future, men and women can share a bathroom without there being a problem. And it's really interesting that you brought up how future movie, like how the movies reflected on the future, because we kind of are coming into a point right now, especially with the whole unisex bathroom problem that we're seeing right now. I mean, in the future, we might end up seeing co-ed showers.
Like that. Yeah.
So it's really something interesting to kind of look back on and think about. Like, for example, if you've ever seen The Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which if you've ever watched an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, you got to play the Arnold Schwarzenegger drinking game. I'll explain more about that a little bit later. But in The Running Man, they have flat screen TVs, like giant flat screen TVs. Like the screens are flat. Where back in the day they had like tube TVs and tube monitors, but they use microtapes to play everything. So like they're these little cassette tapes. So they thought that the tapes would just get smaller
and smaller.
Whereas now we have, everything's in the digital world these days. The Running Man is a really interesting movie if you just want to see like an interesting look on the 80s. Like, so one of the things you'll notice too is a very, very flamboyant dress in these movies. Like, for example, The Running Man, the tights that they put poor Arnold in when he's running through I guess the game, The Running Man, it's kind of hilarious. Like, it's ridiculous, and this big monster man running through there. Another thing, you'll either see like bright and colorful things or really dark and bleak, or a mix of the two for the 80s future movies. Like, for example, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the way that they see the future, everyone's walking around in like foam.
That's probably one of my favorites.
Neon colored foam and these like big boots, and
I don't know why I don't know the reasoning behind that. Why?
I think with Bill and Ted, they were trying to really capitalize on like the youth of the 80s. And so like neon colors were a really big thing. And I think they just like Bill and Ted's just a big over exaggeration of anything, which Bill and Ted is great because it's almost like a reference to a little bit of Back to the Future is involved in the Bill and Ted movies. But then like you can really tell that the fans of Bill and Ted, one, know their history and love science fiction, and two, we're big fans of Doctor Who because they're in a phone booth and Doctor Who travels in a phone booth. And Doctor Who's been around forever. Maybe we'll do an episode about that at some point if we're still sticking around for that. So another thing that's interesting to note is in Back to the Future 2, when he's running around the streets, there's an 80s diner. So it wasn't such a wrong idea to think that, in 2000, I think it's 15 or 14 that he goes, 15. It's 15, right? That they go to in Back to the Future 2. Yeah. That because in the 1980s, 50s diners were springing up and being all popular, that maybe in the 1980, like in 2015, we might have diners commemorating the 80s. And in a lot of ways, people in the 80s, really looked back on the 50s for a time that they really appreciated and enjoyed. And in a lot of ways today, a lot of people are nostalgic about the 80s in a way that is very similar to that. So it is kind of like not surprising that there isn't an 80s diner, because I don't know who would be into that. But like, it's one of those things where it's like, I could see that have happening, in a different alternate universe. Like, if there was an 80s diner, I would go. Right. I would go enjoy that. Another thing that's really interesting to note, and this movie came out in the 90s, so it's a little bit past there. But Demolition Man, they have the three seashells, the old joke about the three seashells, where instead of toilet paper, they're the seashells, and he's just like, what do I do with these? And they never explain it, and I always thought that was kind of funny.
Just kind of weird. So yeah, it's a lot of fun when we do see these things come to pass, but just in our own way. And one of the things that I always thought was kind of cool watching these kinds of movies and things is, for instance, like video conferencing. And so typically when you talk on the phone, you just talking to the receiver, it's a voice call. But then now we have things such as Skype and FaceTime where you're able to actually see the person. And sometimes in some of these movies, like it's like a holographic person that pops up, or just like you just see them in front of your face. But so it's almost that same idea. It's just in a different way. But then we do have like holographic like concerts that are happening and things like that. So it's not too far off from things that we possibly could be doing soon. We're kind of late as far as these movies think that we should be, as far as long as we should be.
Right.
But we're in the works, you know, and things like that. And how you were talking about the flat screen TVs, like that's just a normal thing now to a lot of us. But back then that was a really big deal.
Right.
And then you have like tablets and touchscreen. It's almost one of those things where if you see like a regular cell phone, it's kind of like what is that type of a thing with buttons, actual buttons. And a lot of kids, especially coming up in this generation now, probably will never use a phone that has buttons actually on it. And so like touchscreen is so commonplace now, but back then that wasn't a common thing. And being able to, you know, even like the internet, things like that, and being able to connect and see things that we just take for granted, like Google and maps, for instance, you know, just having the GPS systems versus using a map and actually having to go to a store and buy like a paper map and getting lost. So it actually is really cool. Some of the things that they did think that we would have that we do, it's just like a little bit of a different version, you know? So, I mean, the flying cars would still be, I don't know. I think, what do you think? Do you think that ever will happen?
Nah, I really don't. I think we're going to stay on the ground. Yeah. Mostly just because like I feel like traffic would have to be completely reimagined and you know, like it would be a really difficult thing.
Traffic controls.
I'm actually really glad that you brought up like how like things have kind of we're kind of getting some of the things that we've thought about in science fiction movies, and one of the things that's really interesting to note is that a lot of science fiction movies and books kind of pave the way for technology because people enjoy, like people who watch the movie are like, yeah, that would be cool, so let's build it, and then they actually build it. Like the only reason a flip phone was ever a flip phone was because of Star Trek, and because they had their little flip communicators, and it
is a lot of those guys, and women too, growing up watching these films and reading those books, and then saying, like how you said, let's just make it. How can we create this? Because they grew up wanting those things.
Well, and there were novels from the 70s that were talking about an internet before the internet was even like, created. So it's a really interesting thing. So like, go back, watch some of these movies, and enjoy some of the technology that did happen and didn't happen. And one of the things that I also like to think about is in the science fiction movies we see today, are we going to go back and be like, that never happened, or why did we think that was going to be a thing? So yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed that. So we are coming up on another break, so please stay tuned, listeners. And when we come back, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about Mass Effect.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back, listeners. Now, one of the things that we have all been waiting for since 2012 is the new Mass Effect game. I'm going to have a really hard time pronouncing what this one's called. Mass Effect Andromeda. Andromeda.
There we go. We got it.
So this one's supposed to take place long after the events of Mass Effect 3. And it's set in the Andromeda galaxy. And the new protagonist that they have named Ryder is the designated Pathfinder, so to speak. And all we know is that he's given a task to discover a new planet for the human race to colonize. Mm-hmm. Who knows where this is going to go? The end of the Mass Effect games were fairly, I'm not going to say open-ended, but it left a lot up to the imagination as to where they're going to go in the future, who the new enemies are going to be, because the Reapers are... I'm not sure if they're going to be gone or not, because they're, you know, the 3 different endings of Mass Effect. But in honor of this new game that will be coming out in 2017, we kind of wanted to talk about the previous Mass Effect games a little bit. Now, see, if you don't know anything about Mass Effect, turn this podcast off right now. Go to your local video game store or buy it on Steam. It should be really inexpensive at this point. You should be able to get all 3 games for under $50, like no problem. Like, they're just handing them out at this point, like just trying to get rid of them because so many were made. Go out and play it, because it has the best and biggest and most vast universe and the most lore I've seen of a science fiction video game ever. Like, it's comparable to Star Wars. That's how big it is, and with a plot that's probably better than Star Wars. And don't shoot me. It is incredible. So you take on the character Shepard, who is part of the Human Alliance, and he's basically given the role of Spectre after some events take place, and you're trying to figure out what's going on with this ancient race called the Reapers, who are supposed to be coming back and wiping out all of organic life in the universe. And so all 3 games lead up to that point. The first one's a little bit more military, where he's going around figuring things out, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to take down Saren, who may or may not be in charge, and that sort of thing. The second one, he goes a little bit rogue and starts working with a different organization known as Cerberus, who is definitely frowned upon in the galaxy, because they're more interested in human services and that sort of thing rather than anything else. And then in the third game, you are part of the Alliance Armada again, and you're trying to gather people for the Reaper invasion, as they have come to Earth and started attacking Earth. So taking the fight to them, so to speak. Now, these games are just really, really full of vast, just a vast, vast universe, and so many different races, and so many political struggles in the game. Like, certain races hate other races, and one of the things that's really cool about this game is you can kind of build Shepard how you want, and your choices that you make throughout the game are supposed to, and arguably are supposed to, affect the end of the game. And the choices you make with the companions you have on the ship and all of your friends and everything that you meet, not everybody's going to agree with you. And so there's kind of a little bit where you have to try to appease everyone just a little bit, or you're going to make complete enemies with people because of how you choose to do things. So there's a almost like a morality system, but there really isn't a right or wrong way to go about things. It's called Paragon and Renegade. So the best way that I describe it is good cop, bad cop. Paragon is like, oh, I'm kind of a little bit of a nicer guy, a little bit of a nicer cop, trying to do things by the book, where Renegade's more like, you're more like kick down the door, Dirty Harry style cop. So the best way that I can describe this is you've got Paragon, which is more like Murtaugh, Roger Murtaugh from Lethal Weapon, and Renegade, which is more like Martin Riggs. You're a wild card. So another really interesting thing about the game is the relationships that you can have. Now, you can pick either male Shepard or femme Shep. So you can either play male or female, and man, the people who like Femme Shep love Femme Shep because they will defend her to their dying breath. I'm not saying either one is better. A lot of people will say that Femme Shep is a better voice actress. Mm-hmm. I like male Shep and I like female Shep, and I like them for different reasons. And I like to go through, and this is one of those games that I hold really near and dear to my heart. Like, I go through the entire series once a year, every year. Just because there's so many different things that you can do, and so many things that I'm finding out about through playing through the games. And so, you know, one of the biggest things that was a really big problem with the third game is a lot of people felt like their decisions weren't really adding up to anything at the end, that they didn't matter, that you don't really get to see the outcomes as much as we would have liked, especially because some of the decisions you just find out don't matter and things happen anyway. But I guess that's kind of life. You know,
right?
Sometimes your decisions, it doesn't matter what you do. Bad things are going to happen.
Sometimes it really does.
Sometimes it really does. So there are 3 main endings of the game. And again, if you haven't played the game, turn off this podcast and go buy it, because it is worth it. Now, I will mention the second one and the third one have amazing gameplay. Like, the gameplay is phenomenal. The first one is a little bit of a grind because of when it came out. It came out in 2008. So it came out in 2008, and the combat system is it's not wonky, but it's a little bit more RPG, a little bit more, a little bit more tactical, and the Mako is a little annoying. So what I say to you, if you buy the first Mass Effect, give it a chance.
Right.
Give it past the first mission, because once you get past the first mission, you're going to start seeing this expanded universe and this amazing dialogue system. Put it on casual. The easiest mode, play through it that way. It's not as much of a grind because it'll be super easy. And then once you get to Mass Effect 2, like I remember enjoying Mass Effect 1 a lot and realizing that not a lot of people would be into it. But when I picked up Mass Effect 2 for the first time, oh my God, I was just like, this game's mechanics are so amazing. I don't even know how I played Mass Effect 1. Like, how did I get through that game? Because Mass Effect 2 is great. And by the way, you cannot pick up 2 or 3 without playing the first one. You have to play them all in sequential order. It's basically one giant game. I don't know how the new one's going to be. You could probably pick up the new one without having to see the other 3, but then you'd be missing out on such a great series. So the ending of Mass Effect ends in 3 ways. There's the destruction, the control, and the synthesis. Now, I'm not going to go into exactly what each of these endings do. I'm going to say that the first time I played through the game, I went through the destruction ending. And every time I tell everyone that, they're just like, no, why did you do that? And I have a really good reason for why I did that. I have a really good reason why I don't like the other 2 options.
Right.
And why I think that the destruction option is the only option. I'm not going to get into that. A lot of people just think, oh, well, you're just reckless and you don't care about the Geth and you don't care about Evie. And no, you're right. They're robots. They're not real. That's kind of my answer for a lot of things when it comes down to science fiction. Like a bit of a tangent. You know the movie Big Hero 6? Mm-hmm. Did you like Big Hero 6?
I did.
So,
what? Don't ruin it for me.
I'm not going to ruin the movie for you.
I can see it. You're going to ruin it for me. I loved Big Hero 6.
So the brother dies and nobody's crying.
I cried.
You cried when okay.
Yeah.
When I watched the movie, nobody really we didn't really know him. Like people were kind of sad, but they weren't like bawling. And then when
somebody dies, like the family in all kids movies, somebody in the family dies.
Well, and
they're like orphans.
It's done in like an anime style. And in anime, you cannot be a main character unless your parents are dead.
Yeah, right.
If your parents aren't dead and you don't have crazy hair, you're not an anime character, and you'll probably leave the series soon.
Right.
So one of the things I noticed is I'm watching the movie, and if you haven't seen Big Hero 6 yet, turn off this podcast and go watch Big Hero 6 because what are you doing with your life?
It was so cute.
I enjoyed Big Hero 6. It's not great. It's a good film. It was a lot of fun. No alcohol required. Now, it's for kids. So
right.
When the robot is like, like falling into the abyss or whatever, everybody's bawling their eyes out. And I'm just like,
oh, yeah. I see what you're saying.
I'm like, you guys weren't bawling when the older brother died. And not only that, but like, he's a robot. He's not real.
You get attached. You
feel
connected.
But he's not real.
Very true.
Well, it's the same way I feel about Inside Out, but we'll get into that another day. And I knew that he was gonna. Yeah, no, everyone was crying when the imaginary friend died, and I'm just like, he's not real.
I think. Well, I mean, when we talk about that movie, I have a lot to say about that part. So
Yeah, well, I've got a lot to say about that movie as well, but it's not science fiction though. So I guess you could. I mean, we could talk about it. I guess it is science fiction. But back to Mass Effect, the Geth actually have a little bit more. They're more sentient and human than either in any of those movies, but they're still robots to me. So forget them.
Right. Exactly. I see what you mean when you put it that way.
So, I mean, Mass Effect is great. I'm really excited for the new game. Like, really excited. Like, I don't go out of my way to buy video games when they first come out. I usually let other people play test them first, see how they are.
Right.
Wait for them to go on sale. The only games that I bought brand new were probably Metal Gear 5 and Fallout 4, and I was disappointed with Fallout 4. But this, I trust BioWare. I love what they do. There's a few things that I could gripe about on Mass Effect, and a few things that I can gripe about on just BioWare in general. But like, I'm like sure this is going to be great, and I am really excited for it. So, yeah, I guess that's the end of our podcast, Pauline.
I know, that went by fast.
This has been the Science Fiction Podcast. We are Golden State Media Concepts. If you want to find us, you can find us on goldenstatemediaconcepts.com. And you can also find us on Stitcher, SoundCloud, iTunes, all of those good things. So, with that being said, we will see you next week, and stay saucy.